more questions?
Certainly. We have a question from Jared. It's fairly long. Is it, can you talk about the programmatic differences between Spanish anarchists who wanted a libertarian society rooted in the peasant class and the Trotskyists, another leftists fighting for a worker state? How is this a lesson for building united fronts against the far right today?
The anarchists in Spain were sort of a mixed grouping, and sometimes those groupings had ideological, you might say, battles and organizational disputes amongst them. Some who you might say were purer, it's true, gave more to the idea of the rural struggle, the village upon village, the commune, and that sort of thing. But the fact is that a lot of the power of most of the power of the anarchist movement was in major cities, like especially Barcelona. Barcelona was the foremost industrial center of Spain and its chief port and so forth, with a very large and vibrant proletariat in which the CNT was dominant. That was mixed, that kind of anarchism, with what is called syndicalism, which really saw, rather than building a Leninist type party as the Trotskyists, as you say, you know, as Lenin had prescribed, saw the trade union itself as more or less the vehicle for those developments. And so with that, if it was a broader force, as trade unions necessarily are, rather than explicitly Marxist, you know, parties armed with a Marxist program and all the experiences of struggle, it's going to be necessarily more diffuse and less able to organize itself as a body of combat to lead the workers' struggles. So that was kind of the differences on that question. The differences with the anarchists extended to other questions too, of course, such as the attitude of towards the Popular Front. And there again, the anarchists split amongst themselves. Here, I got one book here. Here we go. This is a book that was just reprinted. It's an anarchist book, Lessons of the Spanish Revolution, by Vernon Richards. This was first published in 1943. And Richards' thesis is that, correct, I think, that the anarchists were wrong to endorse the Popular Front. And he points out that that does go against traditional anarchist teaching. And for all the many years, the anarchists had advised their adherents to boycott the elections, saying that elections, the state, you know, really is not the sphere of the working class struggle. The idea is through, you know, workers' action, mass action, and so on, to, you know, make the revolution, overthrow capitalism. But in 1930, and that's in fact why a more reactionary government came to power in 1933, because the anarchists, as traditionally, boycotted it. But in 36, they had this genius formula, which you sometimes see amongst left groups, even in the United States now, like towards the Democratic Party. And it's like, oh, well, we're not saying support the Democrats, support Biden. But after all, you know, what's the alternative? Well, it's Trump. So the anarchists sort of said, well, we're not telling people to, you know, vote for the Popular Front, but what do you want? The reactionaries? You want the SEDA, you know, the fascists to come to power? And so the anarchist-oriented workers did vote, and that's what gave the Popular Front forces the victory. You had asked about the Trotskyist position. Well, the Trotskyist position was no, and the Leninist position traditionally. We do not support bourgeois governments, capitalist governments. We do not advocate a vote for those parties. If we were in those situations, we might have run an independent socialist campaign. After all, the Socialist Party was the largest party in Spain at that point. You know, or a propagandist campaign, or it was a revolutionary situation or verging on it. So perhaps it would have been correct to boycott it. You know. So that's a long answer to that. John?
Yeah. Let's see. What did the defeat of the Spanish Revolution mean on a world scale?
Well, it had, as you might expect, a very negative effect on the workers' movement and on the world in general, because it was, as many people point out, in a sense, the opening salvo of the Second World War. Just on that level, it was a training ground, a testing ground for Hitler and Mussolini. They used all their latest equipment. As soon as they was off the assembly lines, they shipped it off to Spain, you know, and tested that stuff there. And as far as the workers' movement, it was, as some said, it was like the last upsurge that we saw, at least in Western Europe, of the working class in a situation when they really they really had a chance, perhaps a better chance than any place, of taking state power. And being in Europe, on the edge of Europe, that would have had an electrifying effect, probably like the Russian Revolution had 20 years earlier. So that tremendous opportunity was missed. But on the other hand, the Stalinists were very cynically able to use it because they used it while the fight was going on. It served their Popular Front purposes, and then Stalin backed away from it, and this was when the Republic still had a third of the territory there, but the British and the French had just made a pact with Hitler in Munich. And Stalin said to himself, obviously, but it was obvious, he said, well, I'm not going to make any kind of pact with Britain and France right now. That strategy is down the tubes, at least for a while. We should try to make our own peace with Hitler. And so from that, you got the Hitler-Stalin pact and the advent of World War II.
Okay. We have, rather than stay out of the POOM party, might the Trotskyists have been more effective within the POOM as members able to discuss within the centrist formation rather than forming a subatomic grouplet outside?
The Trotskyists were inside the POOM party. They had a, you might say, an inside-outside operation. They met separately, as far as I know. They put out their own leaflets and so on, but they participated as part of the left wing of the POOM, and in fact, they were able to recruit some, to a revolutionary point of view by that means.